Hello, my name is Ewan and welcome to Divinatory Tarot. Today we are looking at the Eight of Swords, also known as Interference. Now if you haven't seen the previous videos I've done on the Suit of Swords, I highly recommend watching them to give much greater context to this card. And if you have time, looking at the playlists I've done for the Suit of Wands and the Suit of Cups. And the reasoning for that is to give much greater context to what we are looking at, as the numbers in the suits carry on through each of the suits because they are based on the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. I'll just briefly show that now, which is essentially the structure of the universe, each disc being a number. Today we are down here in Hod, the number 8. And do go look at the Eight of Wands for much more context on that. Now, if you're here just to see the Divinatory Interpretations, I have put a timestamp down in the description for you below, but I highly recommend watching this video at least once fully to give much greater context to your Divinatory Interpretations and also to expand your study of mysticism and the self. So without further ado, we will look at the Eight of Swords. So we see here a bruised purple background, which is a lot brighter on my camera than it actually is on the card. I don't know what it is today, but apparently psychedelic card. And we see 6 different types of swords in a sort of ladder kind of pattern, and we see here 2 similar sabres, or the same sabre twice, creating a total of 8 swords. And we see that they're almost like holding back these other 6 swords, or these 2 sabres. Or should I say rapiers, to be more precise. And we see in the background that the pinwheels of the previous 2 cards are starting to come apart. Not fully, but starting to. But everything is symmetrical in the background, however. Above, we see the sign of Jupiter. And at the bottom here, we've switched from Aquarius to the sign of Gemini. So in Netzach, the 7 of Swords, we were introduced to the concept of too many unnecessary thoughts tainting the mind. If this were not bad enough, in the Sephiroth of Hod, which is where we are now, in the 8 of Swords, we are not just overthinking, but we are repeating this pattern over and over again. In other words, we have entered the vicious realm of mind loops and rumination. In the 8 of Cups, we saw that there was the hollow feeling of depression. In the 8 of Swords, it is both the cause and effect of what we saw in the 8 of Cups. And the 8 of Cups was indolence, so I do go look at that card for much greater context. Now, as I expressed in the 8 of Wands video, Hod is closely associated with the concept of the closed infinity loop, and in fact if you look at the number 8, it is an infinity symbol. And hence here in Yetzirah, the Suit of Swords, thoughts have become blocked by themselves or the thoughts of others. This is most likely due to a dominance of a fixed mindset and thinking for its own sake. We, or rather our egos, are getting in our way, or other egos are being obtuse and difficult. But why would this be? Why would the guardian of consciousness, the ego, limit it? And the simple answer is a fear of fear. The ego learnt to fear. It learnt anxiety and doubt in the 7 of Swords, and now it must try and ground itself to feel safe and secure. Yet this is an impossible task for the element of air, which is what the swords represent. Thoughts can only be balanced, but never truly grounded. In an attempt to ground themselves, thoughts have become cyclical, for repetition creates an illusion of safety. As a shortcut to safety, the ego would rather live in a familiar hell than try an unfamiliar heaven. However, this fear of fear is a horrendous and contradictory feedback loop that will ultimately end in tragedy, and we will see this tragedy play out in the 9 and 10 of Swords. In these mind loops, as they're known in psychology, we become so focused on a thought that we not only fully fall into the additional illusion that they are us, like that is that our thoughts are us, which is an illusion, but also the interruption of the flow of consciousness. Consciousness needs to be free and instigated the whole of creation to enjoy itself. And to enjoy itself in new and different ways at that. Thus, when it becomes trapped in a repetitive loop of thoughts, it will drive the mind to madness in an attempt to break free. The analogy of several currents of air buffeting one another to create a hurricane is an apt one in this card. Contradiction and cognitive dissonance are also prevalent within the Eight of Swords, for we will often contradict logic and ourselves in order to support our own internal status quo. As with previous 8 cards, we see this expressed as an excess of the concept, embodied in the 4s, so that stability, the 4 of Swords, the 4 of Wands, and the 4 of Cups. Whether it be the deeds of our own egos or those of others, we are left confused, overwhelmed, and vulnerable to panic attacks. All this illusionary distraction, lost in arbitrary concepts, creates an abundance of stress, and hence the infinity loop towards depression is well and truly laid by our circling thoughts. And this is because depression is essentially a response to too much cortisol over a prolonged period of time. It is an attempt by the brain to essentially try and ignore cortisol, for it is a neurotoxin and does eat away at the brain, particularly the hippocampus, what processes our memory in our brain. And whilst the brain attempts to cut itself off from cortisol, it doesn't. So the real tragedy of depression is that it is an attempt of your brain to protect itself, but it's not even doing that. So you're both depressed and cortisol is eating your brain. I think the logic is perhaps that when you become depressed enough, you become numb, and if you're numb, you're less likely to trigger cortisol. Probably the logic of the brain. But the problem is that cortisol is the spark for most of our neuroconnectors. For example, serotonin, it needs the cortisol to sort of, and so does dopamine and adrenaline. It just needs the cortisol to get things starting. So if we're not picking it up and we're not creating cortisol, we end up living in a grey nothingness. And we saw that reflected in the 8 of Cups. So now we're going to look at the Divinatory Interpretations and the Symbolism. So look at the Symbolism first of this card, and then we'll go to the Divinatory Interpretations. So when Crowley wrote about the 8 of Swords, he described it as a lack of persistence in matters of intellect. In other words, we have become quite used to thinking, but none of these thoughts can solve the problem they have created. And the 2 rapiers we see here blocking the other 6 swords suggest a possibility to end our thought loops with a quick thrust to the point of the matter. Yet the fact there are 2 of them also suggests, as in the 2 of Swords, that there is a stalemate here, an indecision where we make no choice at all apart from to perpetuate the madness described in this card. With a lack of direct action, our choices are now little different from the collection of thoughts we have currently going around in our brain and that we are upholding, and thus blocking our consciousness, our will. As shown here by the variety of swords, the 6 swords in the background. As we know, the 6 of swords was perhaps the most well-dignified card in this suit of swords, as it is science, it is objectivity, and here we have quite lost objectivity, or at least we're holding it back. So here we are limiting and trapping ourselves in our indecision to act, and a stasis of the mind has ensued. This situation is not helped by the zodiacal placement of this card. So Jupiter is usually associated with expansion, broad-mindedness, and luck, which all sound like quite good things. However, we see here that Jupiter is in Gemini, so we have an expansion of narrow, focused, and contradictory thoughts. The complete opposite of luck. Our minds are literally dooming themselves, and we shall soon see the violent path that our thoughts will take to break out of this cognitive hell, and we'll look at those in the next 2 cards, the 9 and 10 of swords. Here we have considered every option and thus paralysed ourselves in choice, hence the term indecision, and hence interference in this card. The frustration and interference caused by these mind loops is expressed here by the shattering of these pinwheels that we saw representing cognitive function. There is more order here than the devastation we saw in the 5 of Swords, for there is symmetry in the background, and it is symmetry to their destruction, yet it is a devastation of cognitive processing nonetheless. And the bruised purple we see here is not only Jupiter's primary colour, but it also emphasises the beaten and damaged state of the mind here in Hod. So now we will move on to the Divinatory Interpretations of this card. And the 8 of Swords is associated with mental disruption and restlessness. When well dignified, the card represents dialectic talent, intellectual insight, causal relations, or should I say realizations, but also relations, relativity, and stoic acceptance of any given situation after inquiring into its nature. So we see that 6 of Swords playing a little bit in the well-dignified meaning of this card. However, as more often than not, the ill-dignified meaning or interpretation of this card can represent mental blocks, frustration, confusion, indecision, brooding, rumination, fixed mindsets, pettiness, and thought patterns that lead to fear, anxiety, and of course depression. The key concept here is being trapped or stuck in one's own mind due to limiting thought patterns and beliefs. So that has been the 8 of Swords. I hope you have enjoyed the video. I'm very sorry, but it's going to get even darker from here on out. So buckle yourselves in, everybody. But there is light at the end of the tunnel as we get into the court cards and when we return back to the aces again in the Ace of Discs. Now, if you really enjoyed what you saw here today, please do put a like here on the video. It really helps the channel and helps spread this knowledge around. And if you want to see more videos like this, as well as tarot tutorials and tarot readings for the different signs, do subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any future videos. So thank you again for watching this video, and I hope you are doing well wherever you are in the world. And may peace be with you all. Goodbye.